Coming up on The World Today. Russia denies weaponizing energy amid Europe gas crisis. US to reopen land borders from November. Havana syndrome reported at US Embassy in Colombia. Thank you for joining us on the program. I'm Teniola Shoboale. Russia has once again defended its position with its European partners, this time denying that it's using energy as a weapon amid surging prices across the continent. President Vladimir Putin blames the current crisis on Europe, saying that after a cold winter, Europeans had not pumped sufficient volumes of gas into storage facilities. The country is one of Europe's biggest gas providers and has been accused of withholding supplies. Also, gas prices has increased by 250% since January, triggering a knock-on spike in costs for consumers and businesses. Energy prices are hitting highs for various reasons, including high demand for natural gas as economies recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. President Putin says Gazprom, Russia's gas giant, was supplying gas to Europe at maximum levels under existing contracts and is ready to provide more if requested. In the meantime, Britain continues to face problems of its own, which is availability of products and services due to a fuel supply shortage that has affected pretty much everything in the country. But the government says people should avoid panic buying, especially as the festive season approaches, as there would be shortage of gifts after shipping containers carrying toys and electrical goods were diverted from the country's biggest port because it was full. Maersk, the world's largest container shipping company, has diverted some vessels from Felixstowe port in eastern England because a lack of truck drivers means there is nowhere left to stack containers at the port. Newspapers have reported that the government would allow up to 5,000 foreign drivers into Britain on short-term visas, a measure that logistic companies and retailers have demanded for months, but which the government had previously ruled out. Cabinet Minister Oliver Dowden says the issues at the port are easing and the supply chain problems facing the world's fifth largest economy are global problems such as a shortage of truckers.
Created by the driver shortage, Brexit and a number of other things that has just all created a perfect storm.
I think that there will be some disruption this Christmas as a result of the HGV shortage, but retailers are really adept at making sure that, they prioritize the things people want, making sure that people's Christmas favorites are available to buy.
And the VOA's Henry Ridgewell joins us now for more on this. Henry, thank you so much for joining us on the program.
Good to be with you, Teniola.
So apparently the shortage of drivers continues to be a huge challenge for Britain. Why is it so difficult to fill in the gap?
It's an issue of both supply of drivers and trying to get new drivers trained up and getting them their HGV, their heavy goods vehicle licenses. So as you've heard in that report, the government has offered 5,000 special visas to foreign lorry drivers to come over here. But the latest figures we had from Kwasi Kwarteng, the business secretary last week, were that only 27 people had applied so far successfully for those visas. Now, those 5,000 visas are also a fraction of the total shortage of truck drivers currently in the UK. The trade body estimates there are something like 100,000 short to fulfill all the vacancies they need. And this is knocking on into all aspects of the economy, not only for example, the first line of transporting those goods from the port, but also into supplying secondary goods, keeping the shelves well stocked. There are shortages of all sorts of different goods across the country, including gasoline. So we've seen queues at petrol stations across the country as well, which I'm sure you've seen in recent weeks. the cause of this is twofold, really. As you've heard there, Oliver Dowden, the Culture Secretary, said that this is a global problem, and it is to some extent. There are many countries in Africa, United States, China, all suffering from a shortage of workers, of truckers specifically. But the problem is somewhat unique and acute in Britain as well. You haven't seen those kind of queues outside petrol stations in other countries. And of course, that points to the problem of Brexit as well. Before Brexit, many of these vacancies were filled by foreign drivers who could move and work freely in Britain. Now they can no longer do that. And the combination of Brexit and the pandemic means that many of those drivers went home over the last couple of years and are now not going to come back because they need visas to get here. They don't want to leave their families in the middle of the pandemic as well. The government says it's time to train up British workers to fill these jobs, that trucking companies can no longer rely on cheap foreign labour, and they say they're going to take the difficult decisions to essentially remould the British economy. But that process is proving rather painful.
Yeah, and just to touch on that, of course, a lot of people are worried about this situation, you know, where they will get all their Christmas shopping done and so on, and also fuel as well. What other stopgap measures is the government considering to ease concerns?
It's not clear exactly what they can do. As we've mentioned, they've offered these special visas to lorry drivers to come over from Europe. They say they're doing all they can to help the industry. They are trying to ease other measures within the industry. But there's no short-term fix to this because Brexit has done, and we're still in the midst of a pandemic. There are still difficulties moving goods around the world, and it is a global problem as well. And the prices have increased significantly as well. So if you speak to retailers here, in the run-up to Christmas, of course, things like toy shops are hugely popular. They say the cost of bringing a container full of toys from China into the port of Felixstowe, Britain's biggest port, has risen fivefold over the past couple of years. So whereas it used to cost something like between $2,000 and $3,000, it now costs $15,000 or more to get that container across. And that's inevitably leading to price rises throughout the supply chain and on the shelves for the consumer as well. The government is trying to discourage people from panic buying. They say there will be plenty of stock and supply, but we are seeing the beginnings of people doing exactly that, of stocking up things like toilet rolls, which were in short supply at the beginning of the pandemic, panic buying petrol, for example, and petrol retail as well. You speak to them, and the limits on their ability to keep the petrol stations well stocked are such that even if people buy only 5 litres extra of fuel, that will mean that they will run short more quickly, and there will be supply strains. So this is the way the economy works, and it's going to be very difficult for the British government to find a short-term fix.
All right then, Henry, thank you so much for joining us on the programme.
Great to be with you.
In the meantime, British Trade Minister Anne-Marie Trevelyan says it's not certain when Britain might get a full trade deal with the United States to secure separate accords on a sector-by-sector basis. Trevelyan only took up her post last month and met many of her key counterparts face-to-face for the first time earlier this week, including U.S. Trade Representative Catherine Tai at a meeting of ministers from the group of 20 major economies. Both Britain and the United States want a free trade deal, but there is no timetable yet for the talks.
So we haven't got a date in the diary. What we have got is a continuing dialogue and the opportunity to look sector by sector on those key areas that we know will fall into, if you like, that full comprehensive trade deal in due course. These things can be done. It's they're monstrous documents, free trade deals, and actually one can work on separate chapters and make good progress in each of those whilst we think about the whole picture. So the first person I spoke to when I took over the role a few weeks ago was Ambassador Tai, and we had a Teams call to really have a good chat so that I could get a sense of where the US was at. And it's a very strong relationship. It's one that they absolutely want to continue to grow. And you know, we have an enormous amount of bilateral trade, hundreds of billions of dollars already with the US, and that doesn't change. But what we are all working towards, and Biden has said this in due course, is a really comprehensive free trade deal. But in the meantime, we continue, you know, the points that you did.
Some updates from the COVID-19 pandemic now. Many travel sites across Singapore have crashed as tourists rush to buy tickets following news that from October 19, vaccinated people can travel freely from Singapore to a dozen countries around the world without isolation and with fewer swab tests. 9 countries will be added to the list by November the 15th. Also reopening borders is the United States. Here's more in the Global Update. The United States is set to reopen its land borders with Mexico and Canada to fully vaccinated travelers from November. It means those sailed out of the US because of the pandemic can enter for any reason using land and ferry crossing points. Air travel is allowed with a negative COVID-19 test. Meanwhile, a Texas judge has temporarily put a stop to United Airlines placing employees on unpaid leave if they have received religious exemptions for COVID-19 vaccinations. The order will remain in place until October the 26th. Away from the United States, the French government plans to ask lawmakers to extend its pandemic state of emergency until July the 31st next year to deal with the continuing coronavirus crisis. The state of emergency extension would mean that the government will keep the power to extend or reinstate restrictive measures, such as the use of a health pass, to gain access to venues such as restaurants, bars and cinemas. The current state of emergency and the requirement of a health pass are due to expire on November the 15th.
Il y a encore, nous le savons, un risque non négligeable de reprise.
And in Italy, public and private employees will need a COVID-19 health certificate to go to work as of Friday. Officials approved in mid-September some of the strictest anti-COVID measures in the world, making it compulsory from October the 15th for all workers either to show proof of vaccination, a negative test, or recent recovery from infection. The Green Pass certificate is already a requirement for entering venues such as museums, gyms and restaurants. Over 80% of Italians over the age of 12 are fully vaccinated. And finally, Russia has reported a record daily rise in coronavirus-related deaths for the second day running, amid a surge in COVID-19 cases and deaths that has led the Kremlin to demand that authorities speed up the pace of vaccinations. Russia's coronavirus task force reported 984 coronavirus-related deaths, the highest single-day death toll since the start of the pandemic, as well as 28,717 new infections in the last 24 hours. Still to come on the program. Star Trek's William Shatner blasts into space on Blue Origin rocket. More details in a moment. Stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. U.S. media say officials are investigating possible cases of Havana syndrome illness in Colombia, days before a visit by Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. U.S. Embassy staff in Bogota may have been injured by the mysterious illness, which causes a painful sound in the ears, fatigue and dizziness. First reported in Cuba in 2016, U.S. diplomats around the world have since reported cases of the syndrome. Its origins are unknown, with some speculating it's a type of weapon. U.S. media also report that U.S. Ambassador to Colombia, Philip Goldberg, did confirm a number of unexplained health incidents, or UHIS, the term used for Havana syndrome by the U.S. government since mid-September. The Colombian president says the country is investigating the reports. Our correspondent in Washington, Maria Bird, is monitoring the situation. Maria, I do remember the Cuba incident and the government denying American embassy workers were being targeted and even denied the illness existed at some point. Why has it been difficult to prove that this is a targeted attack?
Yeah, thank you, Tanila, for having me. You're exactly correct. This has been a great challenge for both the CIA and the State Department to be able to identify and clearly prove that this is targeted. They believe that it's some sort of a microwaving that's done, a targeted microwaving that actually creates brain damage. And due to that, it's nothing you can physically see from an attack perspective. And so I think that has created a bit of a challenge. And again, this is only happening in very specific areas. Yes, we've seen it in 3 to 4 different U.S. embassies across the world, but the vastness of it, I think, has not allowed one to be able to clearly provide the clarity on how these attacks are happening.
And from the few cases we've seen, do victims of this illness recover? Have there been serious cases?
Extremely serious cases like what we're seeing now. There are 5 families that are actually impacted, and we know that the president a few months ago was able to sign an act in place for the Havana Syndrome Act, and so that act provides long-term financial assistance for the families, because this is not something that they end up recovering from in 2 to 3 weeks. This is a lifelong journey for many of them that have been impacted by this targeted attack, which the U.S. believes is a targeted attack. And so it is clearly one that I think that has obviously shown brain damage of the individuals. And so when you talk about brain damage, and we've not been able to see that brain damage has been recovered in the majority of cases that the U.S. has experienced.
And this is interesting. It's coming just ahead of Mr. Blinken's visit to Colombia. Just speak to us about that and where America's relations with the Latin American country lies.
This visit, obviously, this U.S. embassy is one of the largest in the world in Bogota. And so this embassy is one that is very vast in the work that it's been doing. I think that our relationship obviously has been pretty strong, and hence why Secretary of State Blinken is going to be visiting there. But will this have an impact? I think it will. It appears that right now Colombia is taking the stance that the U.S. is doing the investigation, and they will allow the U.S. to do the investigation because it's their personnel. So if the U.S. feels a lack of support from Colombia, yes, that will definitely have an impact. But at this time, I think it's too early to see that this will have a negative impact. And I think that the embassy will continue to continue the work, obviously, with a bit of more precautions and safety precautions put in place to ensure the safety, or to try to assist in the safety measures of those individuals still at the U.S. Embassy in Bogota.
All right, then, Maria, thanks a lot for your reporting.
Thank you for having me.
Moving on now, the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights in North Korea, Thomas Quintana, has warned that vulnerable children and elderly people in the country are at risk of starvation. Quintana blamed international sanctions and a COVID-19 blockade for worsening food shortages. He says as a result, citizens are struggling daily to live a life of dignity. He wants sanctions imposed over North Korea's nuclear programs to be lifted to prevent a crisis. Leader Kim Jong-un this week admitted the country is facing a grim situation. In Turkey, the foreign minister says his country would do what is necessary after what it said was a rise in cross-border attacks by Syrian Kurdish YPG militia. On Monday, President Tayyip Erdogan said an attack in Ankara blamed on the US-backed YPD was the final straw and that Turkey was determined to eliminate threats originating in North Syria. Turkey says police in northern Syria's Azaz region were hit in a guided missile attack on Sunday launched by the YPG, which Turkey says is a terrorist group. 2 Turkish police officers were killed in the incident. On Monday, shells believed to have been fired from a YPG-controlled area further east exploded in 2 areas of Kakamis in southern Turkey. Vice President of the International Olympic Committee, John Coates, says the IOC will not pressure 2022 Winter Olympic host China over its human rights record because it's not in the governing body's remit to dictate the sovereign countries. Rights group and U.S. lawmakers have called on the IOC to postpone next year's Beijing Games and relocate the event unless China ends what the United States deems ongoing genocide against Uruguay's and other Muslim minority groups. Chinese authorities have been accused of facilitating forced labor by detaining around 1 million Uruguayans and other primarily Muslim minorities in camps since 2016. China denies wrongdoing, saying it has set up vocational training centers to combat extremism.
The IOC does place a very high emphasis on human rights. You know that it's a very important part of the fundamental principles of Olympism, the fundamental principles that are set out in the Olympic Charter. But the IOC is not the IOC's remit is to ensure that there is no human rights abuses in respect of the conduct of the Games within the National Olympic Committees or within the Olympic movement. We have no ability to go into a country and tell them what to do. All we can do is to award the Olympic Games to a country under conditions set out in a host contract, and Brisbane's got it, and then ensure that they are followed.
And now all sorts of food are being grown in the lab these days, so why not coffee? With high demand and numerous sustainability challenges facing traditional coffee farming, Finnish scientists say they have successfully produced coffee cells in a bioreactor through cellular agriculture that they say smells and tastes like conventional coffee. The scientists at VTT Technical Research Centre of Finland believe they may have come up with a more sustainable alternative to producing coffee, as farmers throughout the world's coffee growing belt are experiencing negative effects from climate change, which is a huge concern for the multi-billion-dollar coffee industry. Studies are still ongoing, but they're already allowing a few people to taste the coffee because of health and safety laws.
Is it even coming?
We have at the moment different roast levels and different growth parameters in our coffees. And now we of course want to just see, is there a discernible difference and in what direction does it go? So for example, hypothesis goes that when you increase the roasting temperature, roasting duration, the bitterness and roasted odor intensity should increase.
We propose an alternative process here. We skip the farming part and we use plant cell cultures instead. So actually real coffee cell cultures, but they are not generated in the field, but instead we are growing them in bioreactors.
And it's off to space. 3 months after billionaire U.S. businessman Jeff Bezos soared into space aboard a rocket ship built by his Blue Origin company, the craft is set to take another all-civilian crew on a suborbital ride, this time with Star Trek actor William Shatner in the lead role. As one of 4 passengers selected for the flight, 90-year-old Shatner is now the oldest person ever to venture into space. Well, it's a fitting honor for an actor who became a pop culture mainstay for playing Captain James Kirk of the Starship Enterprise in the classic 1960 television series and 7 subsequent films. Shatner now gets to live out the mission he described during the opening credits of each episode of the series to explore space, the final frontier. Amazing stuff. And that's the program today. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tenyo Lashaboale. Bye for now.